Hi, I'm Paul Gibbons, an AI researcher, refugee from IBM Consulting, CAIO advisor, and author of 9 books, including Adopting AI, The People First Approach. Jeff Bezos is famous for his two pizza rule, less known as his one-way doors rule. Two-way door decisions are in quick, out quick, decide, do, learn, and back out if needed. Fast failure, fast learning. One-way door decisions have no takebacks. They're irreversible, big strategy changes, key talent, M&A, new geos. They require extensive foreknowledge, scenario planning, risk analysis, senior team governance. AI has a lot of one-way doors. The question is, do you have sufficient up-to-the-second intelligence through all the hype and the noise to make them strategically? Nobody can keep up. I know it isn't easy, but it's vital. Some of the questions my board clients are asking themselves: in early Feb, we saw the SaaS apocalypse, a market crash caused by a single Anthropic release in enterprise AI. Is the $200 billion SaaS industry heading for extinction or evolution? And what does it mean for the world when a relatively small company like Anthropic releases a single product that wipes tens of billions of dollars off stock prices? What are the 3 biggest AI risks our firm faces right now that we might be missing? Is our AI risk management governance framework robust? And we'll ask a question later on, does it move quickly enough to keep up? We hear knowledge workers can gain 25% productivity if properly trained on AI. By the way, that's a big if. What are we getting wrong? Why aren't we seeing that kind of productivity uplift? How do we build a resilient strategy, one that won't be disrupted by macro upheavals? How do we decouple our business logic from the slings and arrows of frontier models upheavals that might make our strategy obsolete? This is the economic story. I want to start with the story from 2022. I was in a meeting with the head of IBM Consulting, a guy in charge of a business that makes 20 billion in profit yearly, one of Arvind's direct reports. He proclaimed, "We're in a recession now." In categorical terms, no equivocation, no, we're seeing some signs of weakness, certainty, except that we weren't. The US labor market had not been as tight since Hey Jude was number one. That was 1968, for those of you too young to remember that. The Fed in 2022 had just begun to raise rates because the economy, by most measures, was overheated. So that's ancient history. Why tell the story? Because IBM Consulting brought out the recession playbook, firing staff, cutting R&D spending, slicing on training and travel. And I wondered then, and I still do, well, how is he so misinformed? Making high stakes decisions for, a big firm, 350,000 employees. Why was he so sure of something so false? And how could that stance, well, how did it cost? How much did it cost IBM shareholders? Not to mention the people they let go. Did it cost them a chance of keeping up in AI? Very good questions. So on February 2026, the world is a lot different than then. The tea leaves are much harder to read. 2026 came in like a lamb, it's going to go out like a lion. The bull case is driven almost entirely by AI. $680 billion in hyperscaler capex commitments. Microsoft and Meta each projecting more than 100 billion. And here's a number that'll frighten you. The AI build out in 2025 was $2 trillion. Compare that with the moon landing in today's dollars was $35 billion a year, not trillion. But the AI bull case is rock solid. AI contributed enough to GDP to more than offset the losses from tariffs. GDP is catching up with 2024 levels at long last. Inflation is moderate, job losses are contained. But simultaneously, $18.9 trillion in household debt, consumer confidence at 20-year low, layoffs 20-year high. Jamie Dimon talking about cockroaches and private credit, sovereign debt all-time high, not just in the United States, throughout the world. Valuations at dot-com levels, companies with zero unit economics. De-dollarization pressure, restructuring of global trade flows away from the US. Both of those are very credible cases. You have to make a call. And here's what keeps boards up. You're committing CapEx now, knowing that ROI might not materialize later this year, and we might be in different economic times. When valuations crack, consumer spending weakens at the same time, investors might ask, why did you spend $50 million on AI with no visibility on any returns? That's the reckoning. And that's why strategic resilience, anti-fragility is sometimes called, will be really important. Now, many advisors will say you should pick a lane and pursue it single-mindedly. That would be foolish. It's much too volatile. And one of the things I talk about a lot of my talks is decision making under uncertainty. You need a point of view, but you don't need to go all in. You commit fully to your strategy, knowing that the assumption set could shift. Data driven, sometimes they call it at the Fed. You red team relentlessly against the opposite case of your strategy. You use scenario planning to model the what ifs continuously. That's anti-fragility. That's how you look wise and prescient in 2027 instead of reckless in 2026. The full economic analysis is in the deep dive version of this teaser, but let's move on to some other interesting topics. Who is making money? Jerry Maguire, show me the money. The answer is almost nobody. The numbers seem to suggest that a third of the people are losing money on their AI spending. They're just not, they're at that bottom of the J curve that we talk about in economics. The vast middle, we're not making anything at all, close to zero. And then, yet, McKinsey tells us there are 5% of super adopters that are making completely outsized returns. We're not talking about a few percent, 5%, 8%, 12%, 40% from their investments. Now, in your point of view, if you compete with one of those highs, it could be very difficult for you because there's every chance that what they learned in getting to them will allow them to accelerate further away. They already have solved some of the talent and data problems that slow down AI deployments. They may have reached increasing marginal returns, not diminishing. I've got some very interesting stories for just in a few minutes about what that might look like. The real question is what separates the guys in the skinny tail on the right from the struggling 95% or those people losing money on the left? Those are the big questions for today. What it's not, I'll get to what it is. But what it's not is not more compute, it's not smarter models, it's not bigger models, it's strategic clarity, prioritization, focusing on AI behaviors, and not woolly things like culture. So AI will allow you to pivot strategically, but it's also going to demand clarity of you. You can build extreme advantages in one area, but you can't probably do all three simultaneously. Most firms have pilots strewn all over the business. Boards may not even have sight of all of them, nor all of the risks. You need to pick a lane. Operational excellence, for example, model distillation, quantization, automated MLOps might get your cost per transaction to much lower levels than it is today, but maybe you're already efficient. Customer intimacy, get closer to your customers. RAG, LoRa adapters, vector memory, customer personalization at a scale never seen before. Product leadership, innovate in the white space. Foundation model training, mixture of experts, multimodal. Build capabilities that nobody can match. And so those are the three lanes. Difficult to do all three well. The question for 2026 is, are we going to try and be faster, more personal and intimate, or more inventive? Everything else will flow from that. Avoid the mushy middle. The companies who are trying to hedge across all three lanes aren't winning, they're hemorrhaging. Decide, are we treating AI as a cost-cutting mechanism or a revenue-generating engine? I know what excites me more. Your answer will determine your competitive position and your investments. Models are table stakes. The model horse race, I call it. Oh, it's so exciting. Claude overtakes Gemini, which overtakes OpenAI, which is overtaken by DeepSeek, which is overtaken by Manus. It's noise, it's nonsense. I'll tell you why. There were two amazing models dropped at the end of last week. Claude 4.6 and OpenAI Codex. They dropped within 20 minutes of each other. These are really the front edge of enterprise AI right now. Claude 4.6 when it's coupled with Claude Code and Cowork. What matters is not how smart they are. They're getting smarter very, very quickly. But it's how the models work with messy data, legacy structures and systems, real humans inside real businesses, sometimes called the orchestration level. How do you get these models to talk to the rest of your world? How do you get them to talk to humans? How do you get the bits of this to join together? That's the art and architecture of today. How smart they are. They were more than smart enough a year and a half, 2 years ago to do most of the things enterprises want them to do. In fact, we could stop making models smarter. It'd probably take enterprises 5 or 10 years to catch up. That ain't the game. Models today, by the way, that just think are toast. That's why you see OpenAI and Anthropic, particularly, and Google and Microsoft, also scrambling to achieve returns in the personal AI use cases, in the enterprise AI use cases, and the physical AI use cases, particularly thinking about Meta in that regard. If they just think like XAI, they're probably toast. And in 2026, we're past the 2023 era, which is give me some advice, tell me what to do, redraft this email. Now in 2025, it was more go do it for me. There was some light automation, some light automaticity. And now in 2026, we're talking about networks of agents who can do multiple end-to-end chains of work. That's where we're going. The biggest trend might be talk, don't type, which is causing a ruckus in some offices as people loudly dictate instructions to their AI from their cubicle. Seems kind of faintly ridiculous if you imagine that in your head. Big news, Zapier just shipped AI native agent orchestration, agents handing off tasks automatically instead of requiring manual data movement. Vertical models, which we'll come on to a moment, in healthcare, legal, and coding. So the board governance dilemma becomes, are we building on sand? Do we decouple our business logic? How do we decouple our business logic from the horse race of frontier models so that we're, as we say in the trade, model agnostic? Noise you can ignore. Just very quickly, there's so much hype out there. The longer version of this has 10 different signal noise things where we can have a discussion. This is one that's the noisiest, and it's kind of the dumbest. Humanoid robots, $5 trillion total addressable market. Tesla's trading at, I think, 340 times forward earnings. Might have settled down a little bit. Revenues, car sales declining. One of the most expensive stocks in the history of the world. They're still in pilot model on Optimus. And here's the reality. Amazon already has a million of them, and less than 1% of them are bipedal. Bipedal robots, you know, they're a vanity architecture. They're expensive, they're fragile, they're hard to maintain. It's not even clear that it's the best engineering decision for what we want to do with them. You want robots that coordinate with your existing infrastructure that do work, not that look good playing taekwondo. There's a Harvard Boston Consulting Group study. This may blow your mind. It blew my mind when I first read it. Boston Consulting Group consultants are no dummies. They're pretty sharp. They're pretty accomplished. They're pretty good at finishing work. They did 3 different cohorts. One was human only, one was human and AI, and one was humans who were trained to use AI. We'll come to this in a minute, but most people assume they already know how to use it, and they generally don't. Skilled use of AI increased the quality of their outputs by 40% and the speed of their outputs by 25%. And again, these guys are no slouches to begin with. That's pretty incredible. And it's not a cost-cutting story. It's not like, oh, well, need half as many of them. It's a revenue generation story. The board questions are, how do we capture that quality uplift in our revenue model? How do we unleash these big gains in personal productivity and quality? And we'll get onto in a minute, without suffering the risks of shadow AI. If this research is replicated, which may or may not be, it's early days, we have to ask ourselves, why aren't we seeing this in our numbers? These are individual level results. Do they scale in teams and workflows, departmental AIs, and vertical AI? Those are the big questions for 2026. I talked a little bit about enterprise SaaS. It's getting destroyed. It's getting destroyed from the top from a drone swarm of startups that are lean, fast, microservices. It's getting destroyed from the bottom. Imagine, if you will, Azure, Google Cloud, AWS. They're not passively sitting there. They want to move up into the workflow agentic space. And then you have these pane of glass that allow you to visualize data throughout the enterprise. A Copilot might be one of them. They also want to move down into the value chain. And so the SaaS model, these big end-to-end systems, are getting attacked from all over, which is why, many of them are trading at very distressed valuations right now. Honestly, I don't know whether they survive. They may not survive at all in their current forms. And of course, they're moving like crazy to try and, you know, not only fight them off, but trying to be proactive and build AI into Salesforce, into SAP. So far, I haven't heard good things said, but that may not be true. I don't want to be unfair to them. Today, you can stitch together best of breed microservices, leaner, no vendor lock-in, no data moats. You can plug and play. If you build your own PC and you want a newer GPU in it, you pull out the GPU and put a new one in. This is the kind of model that people are imagining for the future of enterprise. Why would you pay for 1,000 licenses when you can get the same results from three? And I'll tell you now, the days of paying for seats for 1,000 licenses or 10,000 licenses, IBM, we might have had 350,000 licenses for something like Workday. Those days are over. Your tooling can be a composition of specialized agents, but here are the problems: integration chaos. They need to be able to talk to each other, orchestration, data fragmentation. Those problems are beginning to be solved. But in most organizations, data is a mess. Haven't quite got that right yet. And governance complexity. You're going to go from managing 2 vendor relationships to managing 20. Nothing comes completely free in this world, but here's something really interesting I want you to think about is people are building $1 million firms on top of multi-agent operational systems in a week with no humans. Like all of that garbage, all the operational stuff, finance and legal, invoicing, customers, I can all be taken care of for you in a multi-agent system. You can put one together. Now you can do that too, even if you're a big enterprise. You can do something like that in the skunk work. You have capital that some of these startups don't have, but that's how fast you can go. You can build something in a week. The Monday, as I mentioned, the guy stood something up in the morning that basically represented 80% of this billion-dollar company's functionality. It's incredible stuff. So I'll leave you with this question. The sunk cost fallacy is something that's a big deal because big companies may spend $50 million a year on their SaaS stack. Even if you're smaller, you might be spending $2-3 million a year on a suite of SaaS tools. You've gone through the pains of integration. They might be new. You're willing to tear up that playbook in favor of something newer and more nimble. It's a big question. Nobody wants to look dumb, and you made the best decision you could at the time. But these legacy IT investments can become balls and chains around your neck. The pulse of vertical AI. So a week after the SaaS apocalypse, there was another apocalypse. I don't think they named it yet. Financial stocks, I think this was yesterday, and wealth managers fell 7 to 10%. Charles Schwab, big wealth management firms, private banking. Why? An app called Hazel from a cheeky startup called Altruist showed that it could do the sort of work that now hundreds of analysts and wealth managers do. It sounds incredible, but it comes from a very good source from Bloomberg and the Wall Street Journal. And people certainly believe the story with stocks falling 7 to 10%. The business model of those wealth managers could be toasted in 18 months. There's no reason for them to be in business. I showed this vertical AI slide to the head of AI at a Fortune 100 company. She said, way too complicated, Paul. The reality, sadly, is much more complicated than this. And consider this is just one industry vertical. Like if we do this for your organization, you're in manufacturing, you're in finance, you're in banking, you're in media, wherever you are, this would be a slide, or actually 10 or 15 slides on your industry verticals. But now let's consider healthcare. $3.5 billion vertical AI market in 2025. Almost half of that is healthcare. It's growing at 3x a year. 3x a year. Healthcare alone, $1.5 billion in spending, and most of it is being spent, 88% is being spent on startups, these nimble little annoying drones that I showed in the previous picture. So vertical AI is very scary because it's coming for healthcare, it's coming for coding, it's coming for legal. There are industries that are being picked off early. It might one day come for yours. And again, I talked about strategic resilience. This is something you have to factor in. Is what kind of moat do we have against this kind of disruption? And can we build now before some silly startup like Altruist comes to us with a new app that they built, in 6 months that's going to blow our entire business model out of the world? Sorts of thing we have to worry about. We need defensible advantages. We need to be more nimble and more innovative than ever, I think, before. One of the things I talk about, I'm spent a lot of the last 35 years doing leadership development, culture change in organizations. That's kind of where I built my reputation until 10 or 15 years ago. My background is in finance. Before that, I was a math guy, I was a trader, I was a derivatives specialist. So I've kind of an eclectic background, but this is really my passion and my love is how people and organizations learn. So I'm sad to say that L&D is traditionally conceived as just way too conceptual, too passive, too slow, and assumes trust. What do I mean by that? You're not going to be able to do AI by putting names of things in people's heads and concepts. It's more like carpentry than like calculus. I'll say it again. It's more like carpentry than like calculus. They need to get their hands dirty with it and not in a classroom. Like learning in the flow of work, it's sometimes called. That learning modality is far too passive. It's too slow. I remember Agile like became a thing like I think it was 27 years ago, the Agile Manifesto. Maybe 25 years ago, the Agile Manifesto. It was a decade before the big consulting organizations where I've worked or advised for most of the 3.5 decades I've been around. Far too slow to develop learning. And again, far too conceptual once they developed it. And it's even hard to find people today who are near enough the leading edge of it, of AI, to bring those sorts of skills to your workforce, which is why this peer-to-peer model really, really makes a big, big difference. Trust is the other problem. Nobody ever said about Excel, like there's a new Excel release. I'm really scared for my job. There's a new Salesforce release. Oh, look out, it's coming for us. Doesn't happen. Happens with AI. People are scared. People don't trust it. I live in a world full of AI zealots who are spending 14 hours a day building with this thing, and most of us seem like we're drunk on the AI Kool-Aid some of the time. 90% of the people are in a very different space. They're generally speaking not very well informed. There are people who absolutely hate it. My niece, recent college graduate. There are people in the middle who just would hope this whole thing is just a bunch of hype, like Y2K earlier in my career. It'll just go away if we keep our heads in the sand. There are people in organizations who are earnestly trying to learn how to do it. But here's some of the misconceptions. I ask people all the time, what are you using it for? And they're like, oh, I use Copilot a couple of days. I get some advice. It drafts an email for me, does some copywriting for me. It might create the first draft of something. It might pull together a report for me. That, not really using AI. It really isn't. It's like having Gordon Ramsay in your kitchen offering to cook you a 7-course meal, and you say, no, I'll just have toast. Um, but most people, that sort of usage convince them that they know what they're doing, and they just don't. And my 7-level AI fluency, literacy, my AI craftsman framework is what I'm going to call it. That's level 1. And unfortunately, people at level 1 can convince themselves that they have some sort of mastery of it because it's very easy to learn to use. Pull it out of your pocket and you ask it a question. As I said, it's not really using. You have to ask yourself a question like, where are my people on those 7 levels? Like, where are they? And are they far enough up the curve, or are they moving up the curve fast enough for us to achieve our organizational goals? The new model of learning is things like hackathons, peer-to-peer learning, communities of practice, edge and super users, pair learning. There's lots and lots of more events, less passive, more active, creator, builder, architect kind of learning, and that's really what we need today. And of course, ethics has to be a big part of it because this thing carries with it tons of ethical baggage. So the purple people first idea is that you select use cases that make people's lives better, that remove some of the drudgery from their working lives. Their learning will be pulled towards them, driven by their personal stake. You won't have to push it at them. So anyway, the board level question is, where's your center of gravity? How literate are your workforce? What are they using it for? How skilled are they? How knowledgeable are they about ethics? These are questions that you really can't avoid from the people side of AI. And so, this keeps boards up at night. Is you want the 40% quality gains, you want the 25% speed improvement, you want a culture of experimentation, you want people building stuff, but you can't afford unmanaged data flows, one breach, one compliance violation, the house burns down. This is really difficult. Now, this is one of the thorniest dilemmas that I've perhaps run across because I always say you need to get in there and build stuff with it. You need to do it. But if you can't afford to take the risk, enterprises do one or two things. They lock it down. They just lock it down. Firewall the crap out of it, ban MCP, ban personal AI in the firm. You know, very possible thing to do. Unfortunately, it kills innovation. You've got no chance. You got no chance of building an AI ready company with new buttons on Salesforce or new buttons on SAP. It's just not going to happen. It's not even clear that those two companies will be around in a decade. Or you can look the other way, which is regulatory roulette. Like you're just waiting for some like silly data breach to happen, and then you're all over the newspapers and you put the enterprise at risk. So shadow AI is a huge, huge deal. And it's partly a symptom. It's partly a symptom that our governance frameworks aren't adapting fast enough. Governance is the way I used to learn it, the way I used to teach it. It's relatively fixed. It's not supposed to kind of blow with the weather. Our policies change with the weather. It's not quite the gospel, but it's, not supposed to be fluid. But today, you need some of that fluidity. You need it to keep up with the tech. And it's not easy. National legislation never, ever, ever keeps up with technology. It's always years, sometimes a decade behind. So this is a problem. I think it's going to be the biggest problem, one of the biggest problems that organizations are going to have to confront in 2026 is how do you get all the goodies from shadow AI without all the risks? Very, very tricky problem. So leadership teams are drowning in hype, vendors are pitching solution, teams are building in the dark. Everybody's missing their AI ROI targets. You probably are too. Everybody's got AI risks that are unmanaged or undergoverned. You probably do too. Your governance framework wasn't built for this kind of velocity. It's not a failure. It's not that you did anything wrong in the first place. It's just built during a different time and for a different time. So the unspoken question becomes, are we funding a P&L transformation or are we just subsidizing our vendors' R&D? And this is why, I'm really passionate, I think you can tell, about offering this kind of up to the second intelligence so that you can bring that to your decision-making processes and get some of this stuff right. This can look like a 90-minute board briefing, a 60-minute board briefing. It can look like a monthly subscription where your team and your organization get a very customized version of this in your inboxes on the first of the month, or it can be a keynote at one of your industry or client conferences. So I hope you found it enjoyable. I hope that it's illuminated some of the dark spots in enterprise adoption. As you can tell, I'm very passionate about this stuff. So do reach out, Paul, at paulgibbonsadvisory.com. I'd be delighted to hear from you and talk about whether intelligence like this would be useful to your organization. Thank you very much for listening.